Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Strategy Gap. Today, joining us for another fun conversation is Will Ritchings. All the way from New York City, Will is the Director of Revenue Strategy and Operations at Security Scorecard. He has an extensive experience in revenue strategy, BI, and analytics, along with helping high-growth companies leverage their data to define and track go-to-market initiatives. In our conversation today, we'll be discussing the importance of data, how to leverage it successfully within strategy execution, and much, much more. So welcome to the show, Will.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Joe. Happy to be here.
Perfect. Well, diving right in, certainly there's a lot of aspects within strategy that involve data. It often is a very key role. But at least from my experience, what I find is companies typically don't have a great handle on all of their data. It's either too much data, too little data, but rarely is it the right balance. So to kick things off, I wanted to get your perspective on how do you think about data and its role within strategy and strategy execution?
Yeah, Jonathan, that's a really great question. I think today everybody is so data driven in business. You get you in interviews, you could be talking to a CTO or CRO or anybody. They'll mention that they're data driven, and I think that because it has relevance everywhere. It's especially important to really define its role at certain ventures or certain junctures of a company. And as a company's planning out or going through that process of looking at what their annual plan is or what goals they want to accomplish, data can help demystify some of the variables or assumptions. Or when you're halfway through those goals and tracking progress, well, you're going to rely on your KPIs and metrics there as well. So, it really is just ever present or evergreen. But what data points you track is really paramount to success.
So with that being said, I work with a lot of clients that build their strategic plan, and we have a software that helps them execute that plan. And sometimes the things they're tracking are quantitative, and they're like, we'd love to pull the data from our other systems, in air quotes, into the plan. And we always say, most definitely. Can you please walk us through where that data resides? And that's where the heads explode. Because sometimes they might have a data lake. They might have all the data that ever existed, but the idea of finding that exact point that they need that can feed into a system that they can rely upon is very elusive. So how have you managed that process of helping organizations get a handle and kind of put their data in a headlock a bit to get a better sense of where things actually reside so they can use it to their advantage?
Yeah, Joe, you're making me chuckle a little bit. When I'm working with my customers, my internal stakeholders, I tend to ask them to describe things in Salesforce speak. The best that they can. Tell me the filters, the criteria. What are they really getting at? And a lot of times that's a challenge, but that's sort of the goal of an analytical team or a data focused team is to translate that ask or that request into sort of the data language that you're going to get the results out of. It can be fun. It can be complicated. And I think a lot of times the tendency is it's really easy as a requester or a stakeholder to start to just throw out or blurb out that shopping list. Oh, I want this. I want that. And that's really where the soft skills come in. You have to run the discovery process. You have to say, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Why is that important to you? Is it a nice to have? Is it a need to have? If we didn't have it, would we be lost at sea or would we have another way to get to shore?
Yeah, because what we're talking about essentially is that sometimes you can arrive at that. Sometimes the data is so elusive that the data is coming from a system and then it's moving into multiple humans' hands, analysts, And by the end of the month, they say, well, I get a report from Jim that shows me all this. How hard could it be? And it's like, no, that's not coming from a system. Originally it did, but it's filtering its way through human hands. And that's the number that you end up seeing. And that has been a challenge, at least for me, to navigate through that because they think they have a handle on the data, but when they peek under the covers a little bit, they realize, wow, there's a lot of moving parts that make this process not as reliable as I would hope, where that person's sick that 1 week, then all of a sudden we don't have the data versus it actually living in a system. So have you had any experience with getting people to the point where they are able to automate data a little bit better so they can actually rely upon it and it's in the right place at the right time?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest challenges companies face oftentimes, especially sort of high growth companies going through those maturation cycles, is getting that single source of truth locked down. Who is the key holder for that data, that report, where And then, supporting it with governance and policies and data freshness to ensure that, yes, that person has the answer. They are the individual over maintaining that given data source or data lake. But even if they're out, it's supported by freshness policies. So if internet goes down, a job doesn't complete, the data gets out of sync, there's alerting. Otherwise, you're left doing analysis or drawing conclusions from extremely stale data that can drive your strategy wrong. It's a lot to do with governance and staffing, and at the end of the day, pushing back on stakeholders too when they go, hey, I got this report or I got this number, and they go, oh, well, where did you get it from? Oh, I got it from Tim in accounting. It's like, well, that's great that Tim helped you out, but Tim, you should really be looking at the data of the insights team in RevOps or in your engineering team. They're going to be the single source of truth. They have the definitive answer for what you need.
Yeah, and certainly there's the challenge of getting the data and how do we actually have that sustainable. But as you know, it's garbage in, garbage out. You have to make sure that stuff that's actually coming in and being updated, whether it's was updated on time or whether it's recent or it's fresh. If not, you're looking at a data set that you may assume is correct, is actually 6 months old because it hasn't been being updated. So when you talk about your data policies and data governance and data freshness, what does that mean more tactfully and with an organization to actually frame that up?
Mm-hmm. It can mean a lot of things, but ultimately it's about quality of the data, the accessibility of it, and the frequency of it. Who needs it? So where does it reside and where does it have to get to? What are they doing with it? What's the use case of it? Is your data, is it structured? Is it unstructured? And when it arrives to that, its destination, is it arriving in the format that's usable and that's going to maximize the value that your end user is receiving from it? And then, of course, it's how often do they need the data? There's depending on size and depending on the frequency, you can run into constraints and scalability issues. And if it's not fully automated, your team can end up spending a lot of time pushing that button, so to speak, of just running that report, executing that task over and over again. And you have to think about the opportunity cost that represents and the risks there are. But that's something that, for an analyst or a data scientist, it's, you have to get comfortable running that process, owning the discovery, and really honing in on the specifics that an end user, an executive might want.
And we're talking about data quite a bit, which I think is something that it allows you to make, as you would suspect, data-driven decisions in a strategic planning process, which is ultimately most important because as you're going through the year, you're getting new data in, and based on that, you're hopefully course correcting versus just seeing how it goes, which a lot of clients that we work with can attest to in the past. It's this information is not great, but let's just give it a few more months, and then they're too far behind the eight ball to make a change. But when we say data, we think of numbers, percentages, and dollars, but in your experience, where does the role of context come into play? The more qualitative things, where the way that I used to actually was with a client yesterday, if I go to an art museum and I see a beautiful piece of art, I can appreciate the art for being that, but I do enjoy the placard underneath it. I do enjoy knowing when it was painted and what the person was thinking, and it gives me more context to either appreciate it more or less. So when you're thinking about data, just having the number on some sort of marquee, there is something missing if there isn't a human explaining it. So how do you then weave that in there so that the full context is there?
Yeah, actually, I run into this issue a lot, and I see it a lot with my coworkers, and then especially when you're creating dashboards or resources for executives, leadership that are sitting all the way at the top and are really far away from that analyst. And the way to bridge that gap is context, right? No data point should sit by itself. Because it's important to know, if I sent you an email and I noted a 168% increase in a metric, but I didn't tell you what time period it happened over. I didn't tell you from where it started to where it went, and ended up telling you that we hired a BDR and they booked one meeting and then they booked 17 the next week. Well, that's amazing for that person, but if it's if it's a week over week result rather than an annual result or quarterly, those are very different implications. So oftentimes the context, you want to associate, if it's a number, if it's a flat number, you want to associate it to a percentage rate, and you want to indicate the time period and exactly what it is that you're quantifying. Is it your company's total ARR? Is it a growth lever, an incubator? Is it where is that coming from? What's the source? And then also, I think it's also important to be transparent in your reporting and include any bias or any cause for doubt, not to disrupt the reporting or the info you're giving, but to let your end user, your stakeholder know that, hey, we feel pretty great about this, but garbage in, garbage out, as you said before. And we have to let you know, take it with a grain of salt, but it is enough to move forward with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think data is important, but you can easily take data and craft whatever story you want to. And I think an important aspect of removing that from the equation is presenting it in a consistent way that's also providing unbiased perspectives on the data. In most cases, that's effective dashboards where you're balancing the different perspectives, you're balancing quantitative and qualitative. But that's definitely something that I see a lot of organizations struggle with, is creating effective dashboards. It's either a million data points or it's 2 data points, and it's tough to balance everything in between. So in your experience, how do you create effective dashboards that drive alignment while also having the right information?
Yeah, John, it's a funny one because I tend to look at the dashboard, and especially when companies are moving fast, they're constantly innovating, heavy R&D, and they have multiple balls in the air at once where they're going to market. The tendency is to get that periodic table of elements style chart with every single thing imaginable, and that's great, and we're going to maximize the knowledge, but when you actually go to operationalize that or use that to support a strategic discussion, you'll find that people have competing priorities and conflicting interests, and they tend to want to focus on the things they know the most about and the biggest red flags. So that's where a data leader, someone technical that can help bridge that gap, or your chief of staff can come in and help guide the conversation. And a lot of times that periodic table needs to be shrunken down or split up to allow a group to have effective discussions around a singular topic. You've all, both of you have probably heard, paralysis by analysis or a kid in the candy shop. And I think that especially in times of uncertainty or growth or a brand new strategy, you want as much data as you can capture. You want to be as certain about something as you can, but a lot of times you're not going to have all the answers, and you need to rely on, I kind of look at orders of metrics. What's a first order versus a second or third order? Because very likely to influence the first order, there's going to be smaller data points that ladder into it. But is it worth looking at, right? How really, in practicality and reality, how much is X going to impact Y? And if it is impactful, great, let's talk about it. If not, get it off the dashboard. Remove it, reduce.
Got it. Yeah, I definitely want to dig into the different layers of data in a second, but I want to clarify one thing you mentioned earlier when you talk about bringing in a data expert or a chief of staff to actually go over it. Typically what I see is, if it's sales numbers, a salesperson's talking about it, marketing numbers, a marketing person's talking about it, product things, a product person's talking about it. Are you saying bring somebody else in to lead that discussion so you are removing that bias, or is that handled in a different sort of way?
No, I am usually a unbiased, unfavorited party or delegate is somebody who's oftentimes technical, like a manager, someone within the RevOps org who's working day in and day out with the metrics, the data points. They're working with the stakeholders for the departments, but they're not incentivized by the performance of a given metric. You see it all the time. There's major risks when you leave all the reporting up to the person who's ultimately their bonus or MBO plan is tied to those numbers. You kind of get into that glory or vanity metric risk. And that's where it's crucial for organizations to maintain a stream of accurate and unbiased results and information with someone guiding it who doesn't have the incentive to go for or against.
And so you mentioned earlier too, when you're creating a new dashboard, the idea of sometimes if you're looking at it too much, the incentive might, or not the incentive, but the way that people might think is they see any little change, they start to freak out. And it's like, it makes me think of all the movies where there's a battle scene and the general is like, hold. And like, there has to be enough time in order to really understand if something is a trend or if it's a momentary blip. It's the difference between like a day trader, that's somebody who's looking at every millisecond and every little small trade, versus the value-based investor. So I guess that speaks to the idea of making sure that your dashboard has a good, healthy combination of leading and lagging metrics, because a lot of times lagging metrics could take a longer time period than we'd like to improve, but at least we have a canary in the coal mine on the leading. So is it a 50-50 split in your experience? Is it something a little bit more, is it a 60-40? How have you seen that really work to ensure that there's enough there so that people don't underreact or overreact? Something right in the middle, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Joe, I think the split, you have to have a healthy dosage of both, but it's how you use it throughout a process, if it's a quarterly or a fiscal year, and then at what points and what you're looking at, right? Lagging indicators, right? As we know, you have to collect. We talked earlier about you have to collect a sizable sample size before you can draw conclusions. And is it if you're looking at things like your average sales price, your ASP, but you've made 4 sales, or you're 2 weeks into your quarter, well, it's not going to tell you a whole lot. So what my team employs and what I've seen work in the past is earlier on in a cycle, looking at and leaning on the lagging or the leading indicators rather more so, and putting greater emphasis on them. What positive signals or risk factors are we noticing, and what are the downstream implications that they may have? And do we have time to impact those, to dig in, or to draw insights out of it, so that if we have missed our shot this time around, we're more prepared the next time? And for lagging indicators, even if it's early in the quarter, we tend to try to look at forecasting methods around them, rather than looking at what is the hard and fast, that closed one opportunity kind of, close the book result. What could it be? And kind of turning a lagging indicator into a leading one, and then tracking it over time, having those check-in points and saying, are we still on track? Are we ahead or behind of our goals? Where are we compared to our linearity? And then making game time decisions around that.
And I think outside of just what is the balance of lagging and leading indicators, I think an important thing to consider is who is the audience that's going to be looking at this as well. I think anybody that's a sports fan, or even if you're not, hopefully you can attest to this. If you're out on the road and your team's playing a game, you're going to pull up ESPN app or something else, and the first thing you're going to see is you're going to see the score. And then if you want to look more, you can dig into the details, quarter by quarter, player by player. You can look at previous games, but you wouldn't ever expect to pull up your phone and all of a sudden you're seeing one of your players' stats and have no idea of the score. So, you have to have that balanced approach based on who you're talking to. So kind of coming out of that, you can keep the analogy going or ditch it. But how do you think about building dashboards for the audience that you're actually presenting to and who's actually consuming that information?
Yeah, no, the design is paramount. It needs to tie directly to your audience, because they're going to have different levels of interest. And they're also going to have different amounts of time to render a decision, right? There's this model or this concept of the decision-making pyramid between an analyst and a C-suite executive. And, at the bottom of it, at the base is the context, and at the top is decision-making ability. Well, the analyst, they've got that heavy base with that upright pyramid shape. So they have all of the context and not oftentimes a lot of the decision-making power. When they're speaking with an executive, it's flipped. It's on its point, and the executive has none of the context and all of the decision-making power. So where do you find the balance in between? And it's, your bluff models, the bottom line up front, tell it to me straight. I'll ask, and then really being transparent, saying, I can tell you how the sausage is made, but how much do you want to know? I have the context, but how much do you need to know to trust that I know what I'm talking about, that the results are solid, and you have what you need to go and move on and then impact the business. So when you design the dashboard, a lot of times it is that bottom line up front, top line, the score of the game, right? The NFL standings. And then if you want the play-by-play or the players, there's, if it's a Google Sheet, you can use adjacent or associated tabs. If it's, a BI platform like Tableau, clicking the links or embedding things in clever ways to enable that drill down functionality. But the design component is so crucial because it directly impacts your user's experience and how efficiently they can gather that data.
not to fall into the trap that Jonathan mentioned earlier around the data can tell you whatever story you want, Mark Twain, lies, damn lies and statistics. But how do you feel about the concept of having different dashboards for different folks within the organization, where it's sort of the analogy I give for people is the reason why the New York Post has been successful all these years is that the front page is the news. And if you flip it on its back, it's the sports, right? So if you're a sports fan, you're not digging. It's right there. And so the idea, if you're the CFO and maybe there's 3 or 4 metrics that really keep you up at night, is the idea of maybe having an extra dashboard where the front page are those 3 things and everything else is exactly the same, but shifting it around so that the conversation goes smoother? Or does that lead to some bias where maybe you're leading the witness, so to speak? What have you seen with that type of approach?
I tend to encourage when I'm looking at a dashboard design or working with others, we put it all out front. We put it, blatant in plain view, as much context as we can provide, as much of whether it's bad news or good news, the dirty details are important. But you want to lead with the headline. You want to say, hey, we didn't have a great quarter. It is down. But also if you want to learn more, here, go to the next page or click into this row, expand this column, and we'll give you the loss reasons, we'll give you the win reasons, we'll give you some of the trends and insights. And it's also about engaging the right people. Do you have the people in the room, in the discussion, who can effectuate change, learn the insights, and then make that difference? If it's, hey, okay, our sales are down, but we learned X, Y, and Z about our customer base. And now we know that we need folks from product to come in and receive that feedback so they can action on it. So it's not always the stakeholder being an executive, but it's somebody who may be somewhere in the middle and can lead that change forward.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I think for a lot of organizations, they can definitely attest to this. But for those that aren't nearly as advanced yet on, how do I tweak my dashboard? It's, well, a dashboard's great, but I don't have the data to actually build the story that needs to be built. And certainly in your career, you've had some experience building data strategy from the ground up. So, on the other end of the spectrum, maybe for organizations that aren't quite there yet with their data strategy and their data architecture, how do you get started on that? What's some of the first steps that you can do to build a successful data strategy?
I think it's important to start with the end goal in mind, right? What are we trying to accomplish, and what is in that scope and what's out of it? Because otherwise you start to get the spinning wheel of death. You try to chase down every data point you can gather, even if it's not a lot, but you might end up creating a lot of noise and drawing conclusions on things that you actually didn't need to focus on. I think when it comes to designing a system or integrating a data lake or something, that you want to have it to be healthy enough that you've enabled the ability to gather that data, whether it's connecting it to your proprietary internal data, getting it into that CRM or the ERP tool. But ultimately saying, what if nothing else, what is the list that I need to have versus the nice to haves? And we're going to prioritize the need to haves because they're going to tell us X, Y, and Z. We'll get enough information out of it. And we'll monitor and check that. We'll put the data freshness policies in place. We'll set up safety nets so that if a job does fail, we'll get an email or you know who to contact with your admin, or we'll automate it as much as possible, but not so much that you lose focus of it or it's just completely out of sight and out of mind, but you still maintain that sense of governance. Tendency is, oh my God, we have companies today have so much, their tech stack is so rich that they think everything needs to be connected. But if that system way over there doesn't actually need to speak to this one, don't make that connection. So it's a lot of deliberate decision making for building an effective data strategy. But it always focuses on the end goal.
How much time do you think it takes to do that effectively? Because especially for smaller companies, I mean, we're talking like what's a good reasonable deadline? Is like have something better than nothing. Is this a multi-year process, multi-week, multi-day? What are we talking about? If you really want to do it, at least to the point where it's affecting you in a positive way, you're a small business, let's say. How long does it take?
Yeah. Well, typically the response when you ask that is yesterday, right? But
fair enough.
But it's a massive question, and a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, and discovery discovery is the biggest time suck in that process. You can have the best, most technically focused team on the market. If they don't know where to get something, or they don't know how, what we're trying to do, we're going to try to get all the data, discovery. We're going to learn as much as we can before we actually get anything done. So, I've seen, depending on the job, it can take months. It can take quarters. Larger scale implementations can take a couple of quarters, close to a year. But that a lot of times can breed a lot of frustration too. You got to keep the execs at bay. Again, with that context, not always knowing the value or impact of something, but not understanding the how to and the what needs to get done to get there is dangerous. But you have to have a solid leadership strategy. You have to have communication up and downstream, and don't sugarcoat anything. I've had great, amazing mentors in the past, and other folks I've worked with that, when we're trying to make the argument for the additional resources to get things done, well, they said, hey, well, then stop turning everything around next day. Emphasize the pain, emphasize the technical skills needed or the time, and get staffed appropriately for it. Otherwise, you would set yourself up for failure, and it will take longer than you anticipated if you were fully staffed. But it can be a lengthy process. It really can.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that aren't close to data also don't recognize that it's not just the time that it takes to create the dashboard and to even do the discovery, but there's a lot of data that you can't get until you have a process built to actually track that. So quick question on your perspective with that. Like, how do you best communicate that to others, that expectation that, they want this data now, but they maybe don't realize that you first have to build mechanisms to track this before it's just available to throw in a pretty dashboard.
Yeah. I think you run into it a lot of times. SaaS, fast-paced companies, and marquee, long-standing dinosaurs alike. You want everything and you want it now. You want that instant gratification, but it can take a heck of a lot to get there. A lot of times that starts with just having that where we are and where we want to go discussion. Right, the current state of affairs is this. The ideal state might be that, but we are at the base of that hill, and this is going to be what it takes to get there. Earlier, I mentioned the need to have and the nice to have, but there's also the what can we have and what can't we have, even if it is on that nice need to have list. So it's that balance, and it's, I think, breaking it up in chunks and making it almost like a sprint, or making it like a project and program management kind of cadence, where you are providing incremental value consistently, but everything that you're building, every connection that you make, is done with scalability in mind. It's not a one-off. It's not a one-time data dump or an export, but it is a integrated, automated solution with governance policies in place. So once you've checked that box, you don't have to return to it, and you can move on to the next one. And that is kind of the crawl, walk, run, where at the end of that cycle, you've checked all the boxes, you have the governance policies to support it, and you have individuals on the team who are involved, who have clear ownership of different levels of that data management policy. It's incredibly important, because I think one thing that comes up that people don't realize for data teams is, just like a PM or product owner, once that product goes to market, there's maintenance involved with it. It's not just there, right? It takes effort to make sure that dashboard is up to date, that it's ready to go for that discussion. And then you go and build the next shiny toy. That one requires maintenance as well. So data leaders and analytical leaders need to consider the maintenance impact and the capacity constraint that can place on their teams when they're going through staffing and resourcing discussions.
Excellent. Well, as you can imagine, we could talk about this for days, but we are drawing to a close. But we do like to end the podcast with a question that we ask everybody, and it's pretty fitting because we're going into the holiday season. So think of a ghost of Christmas past appears and says, and basically allows you to really say to yourself, what advice would you have given yourself at the beginning of this career in strategy? Something that you wish you knew back then. What would that be?
Sure. I think two things come to mind. One is say no more. is, because you're going to cause yourself more stress, more worry, especially when you say yes to something you can't deliver on, right? Yeah. Oh, we want the run rate for this or the average product usage metric for that. And you go, yeah, I can do that. And then you go, I don't know how to do that. I might be in trouble here, right? So say no more often, and then also take accountability, right? If you didn't update something, don't let it go into the meeting and let people draw conclusions based off of it, right? Oh my God, the formulas didn't update down to pass the data, and we've like formulated a pipeline unaccounted for. Well, raise that flag, take accountability, take ownership of it. No one's going to fault you, even if it's bad news. They're not going to fault you for saying, "Hey, you tried, why, thank you. Like, why did you bring that to our attention? Shame on you for it." They're going to say it if you don't, and it could get you in trouble. So don't assume people know what you know if you are the person that's closest to the data. Promote it, shout it out, say, "I don't know if you knew this," or "Hey, we got to be aware of that thing." But those things are going to set you up for success in an analytical career, and always work on your skills, right? 1% every day, and just keep growing.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, no data is often better than bad data, and got to be accountable for that and make sure the best decisions are made. Well, Will, we appreciate your time on the show today and look forward to more conversations in the future. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jonathan.